Welcome back. Florida's House and Senate are controlled by Republicans, along with the governor's office. You'd think that would make it easier, but there's division within the party. Governor Scott and House Speaker Richard Corcoran are fighting over funding for Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida. That's the bill to defund the advertising and marketing agencies. It may go for a vote this week. There are also clashes over how water and land conservation funds should be spent across the state. Another big topic, the possible expansion of gambling, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. Tonight's panel includes Susan Nylon of Nylon and Associates, William, or Wendy as his friends call him, March, a political reporter and correspondent for the Tampa Bay Times, and Keith Fitzgerald, a professor at New College and former Democratic State House member, and also via Skype from Tallahassee, there he is smiling already, State Representative Joe Gruters of Sarasota. And Joe, we'll start with you. First day on the job. I trust you found the restroom okay and everything is so far so good. What are your first impressions of being a state lawmaker?
Well, it's very exciting. Obviously, we've had the committee weeks last couple of months. Today was jam-packed full of not only opening day session. We heard Governor Scott's State of the State speech. We had a couple of votes in committees, but overall, it was a very exciting day, very productive day, and one day down, 59 to go. So looking forward to the rest of the session.
And I'll ask you one more contentious question here that the panel can't wait to respond to. You are in favor of Enterprise Florida. You're in favor of spending tax dollars to market the state. What would you say to somebody who thinks we don't need to market Florida? Florida gets enough advertising with its own sunshine. How do you advertise against a frugal? How do you argue against a frugal taxpayer out there?
Well, it's, you know, really both sides of this issue have good points, but at the end of the day, sunshine and low tax base helps, but it doesn't close the deal. We're competing against 49 other states, hundreds of other countries who are competing for jobs. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to bring in targeted industries? And all you got to do is look locally. Look at Failed Entertainment in Palmetto. They have 425 jobs, average salary of $81,000. What that does to a community is you can't put a price tag on it. You know, reforms, listen, nobody's going to argue that there's been some mismanagement of both Visit Florida and Enterprise Florida. But the key is to reform these organizations so that we can continue to put people to work and we can invest in our people, because at the end of the day, Governor Scott's right. It's all about jobs and getting people employed and allowing them to be good providers for their family, because that's what people want, and jobs solve a lot of issues. So I support Governor Scott. I support reforming these two organizations, and it's going to be probably the biggest battle that we have this session. All
right, Joe. Okay, show of hands now on the panel. Who is in favor? And of course, you're a journalist, so you're not in favor or against. Between the two on the flank here, in favor or against of funding Visit Florida and Enterprise Florida? Yes or no?
Maybe some of it, but not as much.
Keith?
Well, and I'm actually with Representative Gruters in the sense that it's not if, but how you do it.
Okay.
OPAGA, which is an organization that does analysis for the legislature, looked at the efforts over the last several years of Enterprise Florida recently and found that the money has not been very effective. So if you're going to go forward with it, you better take a look at it and make sure the money's getting some payoff.
Wendy, the top man has been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in that position, I believe, correct?
Oh, yes, and there's been controversy over bonuses given to staff members. Governor Scott's position on this took a big hit, though, this week when that top man that you referred to resigned because of the controversy, was replaced 3 months ago by a person of Scott's choosing who, 2 days ago, unexpectedly resigned, citing differences with Scott which weren't explained. Now, this is going to make it even harder for Scott to make his point in the legislature.
Now, some perspective. We haven't heard about this and down here in Sarasota until the past few months. Has this issue been brewing for a longer time in Tallahassee?
Oh, yes. Yes, there's been controversy in the last couple of sessions, and Scott has failed to get the amount of money that he wanted for Enterprise Florida the last couple of sessions. It's just really come to a boil this year.
So, Keith, this is not a black and white issue. You just can't say you're for it or against it. You say you're for it with certain tweaks.
Yeah, and I think that there's an ideological wing of the Republican Party who are true libertarians, and that's who Speaker Corcoran says he represents, who think The government simply should not be picking winners and losers and giving little piles of money to this group and that group. And that's a consistent point of view. My experience of being on the Economic Development Committee is that sometimes a little money in the right place can make a big difference in enticing high value added industry to Florida, and we should do that, but we have to be really careful about how we do it.
Interestingly, though, the Democrats are siding with Corcoran's side, the libertarian side. They're calling EFI corporate welfare and saying it's just a way that Republicans want to repay their corporate campaign donors.
Well,
And I think there is a lot of that.
What are we looking at? $85 million for Enterprise Florida and $76 million for Visit Florida? When we're not expanding Medicaid, and the jobs they're creating aren't top-paying jobs, they're pretty low-paying jobs. So why not take that money if you're going to invest in the economic development and put it into businesses that have already proven themselves in Florida instead of luring more competition here?
When we come back, I want to ask you, are we getting a bang for the buck? Is that a yes or no question? We'll find out next. Stay with us. We'll have more on the legislative session after this brief timeout. Stay with us. Tonight we're discussing the start of the state's legislative session. Our guests tonight are Susan Nyland of Nyland & Associates, William Wendy March of the Tampa Bay Times, and Keith Fitzgerald, professor at New College, and also via Skype from Tallahassee is new State Representative Joe Gruters. Joe, there is some concern already down here in Sarasota. Even though the House and Senate and the governor's office are all run by Republicans, it's already so contentious. This thing might not end in 60 days. Are we bound for a special session already, do you think?
Well, the speaker said he's not afraid of going into special session. I certainly hope not. The legislature is meant to be a part-time body. I'm hoping that people will pass whatever we need to do in the 60 days that we have available, and that we can move on with our lives and come back next year. But the way it's going, it looks like there may be some issues that keep us past the original 60 days. But I wanted to bring up one thing real quick that Susan Nyland said. It's about expansion of existing businesses. And just so the viewers out there know, that a lot of the incentive money does go to help out local businesses expand. Enterprise Florida and these incentives are both to expand local companies, and it's also because we're competing against a global economy. We don't have a competitive edge in terms of the environment, and what we're doing is we're giving us a slight advantage by bringing some of these companies. And if you could all remember the downturn that we had, you know, we need to diversify our economy, and if we could bring in targeted industries to help out bring high-paying jobs that can help us during these economic downturns, which we will have another one, we will all be much better off.
Well, Joe, today the governor spoke for a third of his speech. 1/3 of his speech dealt with an issue that really compromises less than 1% of the budget. He's discussing Enterprise Florida and Visit Florida when there are much larger...
That's why it's so important. I hate to say it, it's so important to the governor. When he was elected, it was all about jobs, jobs, jobs. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, you know, Governor Scott has created over 1.2 million private sector jobs since he's been elected. And what we have to decide is, do we want to continue to focus on bringing private sector jobs to our state, which helps out everybody? And if you do, you should agree with the reforms that the bill that I've sponsored takes into consideration some of the issues that Keith had and some of the issues that Susan had. And basically, it all comes down to return on investment, making sure that companies hit certain benchmarks before they're able to receive some of that cash. But at the end of the day, if you could allow Floridians to do better for themselves and be better providers for their children, jobs solve a lot of issues. The Governor Scott's right on this one, and I hope that that we'll reform this overall process.
Keith, you're antsy to respond.
Well, you know, people on both sides do this, so this is not a partisan remark, but the idea that the governor is responsible for every single new job created in the state of Florida over the last 8 years is just preposterous. It's sort of a ridiculous claim. Jobs grow on a national basis. States have factor endowments. What governments do have very little to do with it. By the way, the economists who've looked at Florida have said we have not done a very good job at all over the last 8 years in bringing high value added employment to the state. So it's a big deal. But back to your point, we're talking about a $600 million tax cut for businesses, which I think might actually have a much bigger impact in creating jobs than this, and a $500 million cut in reimbursements for Medicaid for hospitals and nursing homes. That will have a gigantic economic impact. So I think this really has a lot more to do with the feud between the speaker and the governor than it does about jobs in Florida. And I think that we ought to focus on the big issues and get off of the petty stuff.
Let's talk about one of the state senators from our area, Greg Steube. He's really causing quite a stir in the statewide press. His issue about guns and where they can be held and concealed and in open carry. What are you reading? What are you hearing? What is the perception? I'll start with the journalist who's down the middle on this issue. Wendy, what is Greg Steube is becoming a household name in certain circles.
Well, he is getting a lot of attention. The left is calling him the crazy guy, sponsoring legislation that they call insane. And what they mean by that mostly is the gun rights expansions. Senator Steube has sponsored several bills that would eliminate gun-free zones, allowing them, as we heard in the Jacqueline's piece, opening piece, allowing them in places like bars, churches, schools, college campuses, government meetings. It's been a major cause for him, and the interesting thing is that some of these bills, some of these very same bills, were stopped in the last two sessions by a comparatively moderate Republican, Miguel Diaz de la Portilla, who was chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Well, Steube has now replaced de la Portilla in that position. De la Portilla lost his seat, and Steube is now chairman of the Judiciary Committee in a position to let these bills go.
So there is a chance that these bills could pass?
Yes.
They actually say that it rides in the Senate, the decision in the Senate, where before, as Wendy pointed out, he was in the House and everything got stopped in the Senate. Well, Senator Steube has told me over and over again that the Senate has become way more conservative than it ever has been. So he's going to get more support.
I do have some knowledge
Yes.
on this.
Joe? Go ahead.
Yes. The interesting thing is, so most of the Senate committees are 5-4, 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. On the Judiciary Committee, which Greg is the chairman, there are 2 Republicans who are not in favor of these gun bills. So I don't think any gun bill is going to pass this session.
Keith?
Yeah, and just to go back to what Wendy started with, is that Senator Steube has sort of staked out a position, almost a brand, as a very extreme legislator, and he's becoming known statewide for that. I've heard rumors he's thinking about running statewide. I don't know if that's true. He has a couple of immigration bills that are clearly unconstitutional and wouldn't really matter, but stake out that position of being very hostile toward immigrants. So this is a thing for him, that he's trying to stake out that ground.
Senator Steube is also doing one other thing. He and I believe Joe Gruters is the House sponsor of this, an anti-abortion measure that would ban abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy.
He is indeed. One of your big issues, Susan, is medical marijuana. What are your thoughts about the future of that in Florida now in light of the situation?
You want to talk about economic development, that's where you should focus your time. The biggest issue right now in Tallahassee is basically how many nurseries, growers are actually going to allow in the state. I think right now they're looking at 8. The question is, can they expand it, should they expand it to meet the needs and the demands of the state? Locally, even here in Sarasota, but also around, communities are deciding whether they want dispensaries in their communities. That's going to have an impact as well. You know, we passed a bill 4 or 5 years ago called Charlotte's Web, and it took so long to get there that we haven't even addressed that, let alone what we're going to do with the mandate from the people saying that we need to expand medical marijuana.
Taking a step back from 30,000 feet looking down here, of course, the federal government, President Trump right now, causing a very polarized reaction right now on the streets, pro and con. Has this had much of an effect on the tone in Tallahassee?
We look to you, Keith.
Who's first?
I believe it has. I believe it's created at least some greater incentive for harsher language, harder line rhetoric, pro-Trump and anti-Trump forces confronting each other at the state level on state issues. What do you think?
Well, and I think that there are substantive policy issues where it's going to cause some big problems as well, because if we're talking about moving to block grants for Medicaid, that's a revolutionary change, and the state's been struggling with what to do with Medicaid anyway, and if that comes in, that'll cause big problems. But I definitely think that the entire country is sort of reeling with this sense that politics is very unstable, and there's no doubt that it's going to have an effect on the tenor and the tone of the session.
For years, town hall meetings by congressmen were usually yawners, and now they're in demand. It's all changed. Yeah. We'll take a quick break right now and come back and have some final thoughts from our panels. Stay with us. Welcome back. They're back to work in Tallahassee. So how will that affect you here on the Suncoast? Our guests join us now for our final thoughts. We'll start in Tallahassee with incoming State Rep Joe Gruters. Final nugget you want to pass along before we say goodnight, Joe?
Well, thanks, Ray. Thanks so much for allowing me to be on tonight. And I'll tell you that my overall goal, well, I'll say how I feel extremely lucky to be up here representing Sarasota-Manatee County. When I ran, I basically said I want to run to continue to make our area the best possible place to live and work. And everything I do is to further that goal and to try to help the economy grow, to help businesses, and to help families do better at home. And I'm trying to help every way I can our community. I'm excited over the next 59 days for some big things to happen. And I'm here to talk anytime, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on with you guys here tonight.
Okay, thanks for your time. Best of luck. Talk to you again soon. Thank you, Joe Gruters. Susan?
You know, there's a loud murmur happening in Tallahassee that they're already, not on the first day of starting session, that they're already talking about having a special session. I don't know if anybody's aware of it, but it's on average $50,000 a day for every day we're in special session. How can you actually start off your session with those threats?
Taxpayers don't like this kind of stuff at all.
Exactly.
Right. What's driving this, do you think, Wendy?
Well, part of it is what Keith referred to a minute ago, the sharp ideological differences involved. But part of it is also everybody's hardening their positions because they're running for office. Governor Scott wants to run for the Senate in 2018, and Corcoran wants to run for governor.
Does Governor Scott have a chance as senator, do you think?
Absolutely, he has a chance. He may be starting out slightly behind Bill Nelson, who he'll run against. A University of North Florida poll a couple of days ago showed Nelson up 6, but Nelson's still less than 50%.
And it's all Republicans in Tallahassee, and yet there's this infighting, Keith.
Yeah, so this marks the 20th anniversary of Republican control of Florida government. Governor, both houses of the legislature. My general observation is one-party states never work well anywhere in the world, and that's true regardless of what the party is. So that's not just a swipe at Republicans. When you have one party in control, competition becomes much more personal and much more tied to the power ends of the politicians, and it's not good for anybody. So we need to figure out how to get more competition in government here in Florida.
All right, before we go, I want to share some of our thoughts from our viewers about last night's topic, which was congressional town halls, which are now very popular. Across the nation, we've seen constituents demand answers from our elected officials at town hall meetings. Suncoast constituents want to hear from their politicians as well. Congressman Tom Rooney held a meeting in Englewood yesterday, while Congressman Vern Buchanan has yet to have one since President Trump took office. Here's what some of you are saying. Cindy Rapian writes, I guess they are too afraid to listen to people they keep saying they are working for. Let's fire the people who are not doing their job. Pete Weiler writes, hold a town hall meeting so long as everyone, no matter what side, can act like adults and not scream and yell and disrupt. It does not matter who we work for because no one should be subjected to that, no matter what their job is. And Tony Viscardi writes, he should show up and the people attending should at least listen and not be as disruptive as is the norm lately. If you want to join the conversation on this topic and tonight's topic as well, go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/news at 7. You can also watch past Roundtable discussions. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, as well as Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Thanks to Susan Nyland, Wendy March, and also Keith Fitzgerald. Great conversation. Also Joe Gruters as well via Skype in Tallahassee.